Cocaine, a synthetic drug aimed at younger users.
What if an entire city awoke to discover that over 800 suspected criminals, including murderers and child predators, had been swept up overnight? That is precisely what happened in Houston when a massive surge operation by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, backed by federal and local agencies, hit more than 100 sites simultaneously. Officials called it one of the largest coordinated crackdowns on organized criminal networks in the past decade. The scale was staggering: 822 arrests across the metropolitan area, exposing a vast web of gang members, cartel associates, and fugitives who had quietly embedded themselves in Texas neighborhoods. The operation, described by officials as Take Back America, was not a routine enforcement sweep. It was designed to strike deep into the command and control structures of transnational gangs such as MS-13 Pizzas and offshoots of Central American cartels that had been using Houston as a logistics hub. President Donald Trump, according to White House sources quoted by Reuters, was briefed in real time and later praised the action as proof that federal law enforcement remains capable of delivering decisive blows against networks that pose both local and national threats. But the arrests were more than just numbers. Each represented a violent past or potential future. Among the most high-profile detainees was Francisco Eduardo Bonilla, tied to multiple homicides, and William Alexander Tales Amaya, an alleged child predator whose record had evaded local tracking systems until ICE's raid. Then there was Lloyd Tenache Huey, linked to international smuggling channels stretching from the Gulf Coast into Central America. Their names underline the danger of what law enforcement confronted: a landscape where convicted killers and predators mingled with undocumented labor traffickers and drug runners. Beyond the immediate law enforcement drama lies a wider geopolitical context. Analysts from Jane's Defense Weekly have warned that while American authorities concentrate on dismantling urban gang structures, the global drug trade has been evolving under wartime conditions. The Ukraine conflict, for instance, has shifted smuggling routes. Some narcotics once trafficked through Eastern Europe now flow more heavily into Mexico, where cartels partner with Chinese suppliers of precursor chemicals. In turn, those cartels extend their influence into U.S. cities like Houston. Local raids are essential, explains security scholar Dr. Andrea Kendall Taylor in an interview with The Guardian. But unless you account for the strategic shifts driven by global wars and rivalries, these networks regenerate. From a tactical perspective, the Houston sweep demonstrated lessons drawn from battlefields abroad. IC officials deployed real-time drone reconnaissance and AI-assisted data analysis capabilities originally honed during U.S. counterinsurgency missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Commanders cited these tools as critical in identifying safe houses, monitoring suspect movements, and ensuring the arrests unfolded with minimal resistance. That transfer of military-grade technology into domestic law enforcement underscores how America's global conflicts echo back into its own streets. The operation also sends a broader signal to NATO allies. As Europe struggles with cartel-linked trafficking routes funneling cocaine through West African ports into Spain and Italy, U.S. successes in dismantling American nodes of the network demonstrate how transatlantic security is increasingly interconnected. By neutralizing cartel-linked operatives in Houston, Washington indirectly supports European partners confronting the same adversaries across the Atlantic. Still, questions loom. Can one operation, no matter how vast, truly dismantle a web that stretches from Mexico to Africa and from Eastern Europe to the Middle East? And what will happen in communities that suddenly find hundreds of suspected criminals removed overnight? Will trust in law enforcement grow, or will fears of disruption feed new resentment? How dangerous can a city become when predators, murderers, and gang enforcers hide in plain sight, shopping at the same stores, walking the same streets, even sending their children to the same schools? The Houston raids pulled back the curtain on a chilling reality. The 822 individuals arrested were not faceless statistics. They represented a wide spectrum of criminal activity that had infiltrated neighborhoods across Texas. Consider the case of Francisco Eduardo Bonilla, who authorities described as a priority target. His rap sheet linked him to multiple violent crimes, including homicides in both Texas and El Salvador. William Alexander Tales Amaya, detained in the same sweep, carried allegations of child predation that had alarmed investigators for months. And then there was Lloyd Tenache Huey, a figure with ties to cross-border trafficking networks. Each arrest tells a story of how global criminal structures blend into American suburbia, a pattern that has been repeated in other cities such as Los Angeles, Chicago, and Miami. The most alarming aspect analysts argue is the gang overlay. Groups like MS-13 and PISAs don't just commit crimes, they enforce parallel systems of power relying on fear, extortion, and even recruitment of teenagers in vulnerable communities. In Houston, police reported that some high schools had already been targeted by recruiters who offered young men a sense of belonging in exchange for loyalty to violent organizations. This revelation is particularly troubling for a city already stretched by population growth and migration pressures. Western security experts note that the timing of such operations is significant. According to a report by Defense News, the spike in gang-related arrests in Texas corresponds with broader geopolitical shifts. As U.S. military resources pivot to deter China in the Pacific and to support Ukraine's defense against Russia, domestic law enforcement has been asked to carry a heavier burden at home. Cartels and gangs sense these vulnerabilities. They exploit border surges, technological blind spots, and even encrypted apps to shield their networks. Houston's crackdown, therefore, was not simply about protecting one city, it was about closing a critical flank in America's national defense. The international dimension cannot be ignored. Intelligence released through Reuters this summer revealed that certain Mexican cartels had intensified cooperation with networks in West Africa and the Balkans, smuggling narcotics alongside human trafficking rings. The individuals arrested in Houston were in many cases the American end of that chain. Dr. Robert Muja, a Brazilian-based security strategist interviewed by BBC World, explained it bluntly. These networks are hydras. Cut off one head in Houston, and unless the international body is weakened, another head will grow. President Donald Trump has positioned the crackdown as a cornerstone of his administration's renewed law and order agenda. He publicly declared that no U.S. city should serve as a safe haven for killers and child predators, emphasizing that the arrests show Washington's commitment to restoring trust in communities that feel under siege. His message resonated with many Americans who see rising crime statistics as a national security issue, not just a local policing challenge. For the people of Houston, the immediate impact was visible. Streets cleared of suspects, schools receiving reassurances, and neighborhoods briefly free from the shadow of intimidation. Yet, as community leaders told The Guardian, there is also unease. Some worry that families caught in the raids, whether guilty or not, will perceive the government as heavy-handed, risking tensions between law enforcement and immigrant communities. This tension sparks a larger question. Can the U.S. effectively fight organized crime at home without eroding the trust of the very communities it seeks to protect? The answer may determine whether future operations gain public support or provoke resistance. What kind of force is required to bring down a network of predators, murderers, and hardened cartel operatives? The Houston operation answered with sheer scale and precision, but the real story lies in how it was executed. Unlike traditional sweeps of the past, this raid fused intelligence-driven policing with tools borrowed from modern warfare. The raids were coordinated by a coalition of agencies, ACE at the core, supported by the FBI, DEA, and Houston Police Department. Each brought a unique capability. The DEA traced narcotics supply lines, the FBI analyzed encrypted communications, ATF monitored illegal weapons transfers, while ICE led the operational strikes on safe houses. According to Reuters, more than 1,200 federal and local officers were mobilized. The level of integration mirrored joint task force operations once reserved for counterterror missions overseas. Technology played a decisive role. Law enforcement deployed AI-assisted video analysis, combing through thousands of hours of surveillance footage to identify suspects frequenting known cartel-linked businesses. Social media scraping tools similar to those used by NATO to track Russian disinformation campaigns helped identify digital chatter pointing to gang meetups. Most critically mobile biometric systems were rolled out, allowing officers to scan fingerprints and facial data in real time. This prevented false identities, a common tactic among gang operatives who cycle through forged passports and IDs. Western analysts noted the clear parallels to counterinsurgency doctrine. Professor Michael O'Hanlon of the Brookings Institution told BBC News, "What you're seeing in Houston is the direct application of lessons from Iraq and Afghanistan. You don't just arrest, you dismantle networks using intelligence fusion and constant pressure." That perspective underscores how the United States has brought home the very methods it once used abroad to combat Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But tactics evolve in response to threats. Cartels have increasingly turned to military-grade weapons, a reality underscored by seizures during the Houston raids. Among the confiscated items were AR-15 style rifles modified for full automatic fire, high-capacity magazines, and body armor comparable to what NATO troops carry in Eastern Europe. Officials confirmed that some of these weapons were smuggled from Central America, while others were traced back to straw purchases inside the US itself. The chilling implication: Houston streets were one shipment away from looking like the outskirts of Kharkiv or Gaza. This convergence of domestic and international crime is not lost on policymakers. In Brussels, NATO intelligence leaders privately briefed members on the Houston operation, warning that the same smuggling channels bringing cocaine to Europe may be capable of delivering illegal arms into conflict zones. A senior European diplomat speaking to DW stated, "When America disrupts these nodes, it indirectly protects European security. The gangs are not just a Houston problem, they are a global enterprise." Critics, however, question the long-term sustainability of such resource-intensive operations. Civil rights groups have filed lawsuits alleging constitutional overreach, claiming that mass raids risk violating due process and disproportionately targeting immigrant neighborhoods. Yet federal officials counter that the operation prevented untold numbers of violent crimes. As one ICE commander put it, "Every predator we take off the streets is a life potentially saved." Here lies the dilemma: can law enforcement continue to escalate with military-style tactics without crossing into militarization of domestic policing? The answer may shape not only Houston's future, but the model of urban security across the United States. What happens after the sirens fade, the raids end, and the suspects are booked into holding facilities? For Houston, the answer is both relief and uncertainty. The legal and social aftermath of an operation this large is already rippling through courtrooms and communities. In the immediate wake of the raids, prosecutors face the monumental task of preparing hundreds of preliminary hearings. Many hinge on phone records, gang affiliations, and digital evidence seized during the arrests. Some cases are clear-cut individuals already convicted of violent crimes, now facing deportation or additional federal charges. Others are murkier, built on circumstantial evidence or gang connections that defense lawyers argue may not stand in court. According to BBC News, World and Europe judges in Houston are already warning of clogged dockets and strained resources, with defense attorneys preparing aggressive challenges. Meanwhile, city leaders celebrated the short-term gains. The Houston mayor's office released a statement applauding federal cooperation, claiming that residents felt an immediate reduction in threats. Local police chiefs noted a measurable drop in gang-related calls in the days after the raids, but community organizations painted a different picture. Advocacy groups like the Texas Immigrant Rights Network accused ICE of sweeping up individuals with limited ties to gangs, potentially tearing families apart and sowing distrust between immigrant communities and law enforcement. Safety cannot be built on fear, a spokesperson told The Guardian. The broader legal fallout raises serious constitutional questions. Can mass raids relying on AI surveillance and biometric scans withstand scrutiny? Under the Fourth Amendment, civil rights attorneys argue that rapid on-site identification, while effective, risks errors that could entangle innocent people. Federal officials, however, stress that all arrests were backed by warrants and vetted intelligence. Still, the lawsuits will force courts to balance national security imperatives with civil liberties, a debate echoing the tensions of the post-9/11 era. Beyond the courtroom, neighborhoods feel the shock. Some residents told Reuters they finally felt safe walking at night, while others described streets patrolled by armored vehicles as a war zone atmosphere. For many, the arrest cut two ways: the removal of dangerous criminals, but also the fear that heavy-handed tactics could become the new normal. This duality is not unique to Houston. Similar debates have followed cartel takedowns in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Miami, where communities often welcome safer streets, but recoil at the militarized policing that accompanies it. Globally, the Houston operation feeds into a larger conversation. Western analysts argue that transnational gangs have become as destabilizing as state adversaries. NATO's intelligence briefings increasingly place organized crime alongside cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns as hybrid threats undermining Western security. In Europe, where cocaine trafficking through Spain and the Netherlands has surged, experts see parallels to Houston's struggles. Dr. Rafael Jimenez of Spain's Elcano Institute remarked, "What Houston experienced is what Antwerp and Barcelona experience daily. Organized crime networks are now global security actors. For the Trump administration, the political impact is unmistakable. By tying the Houston crackdown to broader law and order priorities, the White House is positioning itself as the defender of communities against both foreign and domestic threats. Supporters hail it as decisive action. Critics warn it risks alienating minority communities and stretching already burdened legal systems. This raises the next pressing issue as these trials unfold. Will the community's sense of justice outweigh its fear, or will cracks in trust widen into long-term divisions? The answer may dictate how the public views federal raids in the years to come. What happens when a raid designed for one city exposes a web that stretches across entire regions? The Houston crackdown did not stop at state borders. Within days, federal intelligence flagged connections between those arrested and operations in Louisiana and Arkansas. Several safe houses discovered in Houston turned out to be logistics nodes for transporting narcotics and firearms northward, feeding networks that spanned into the Midwest. Investigators confirmed that many of the gangs targeted particularly factions of MS-13 and the Pisa's network were not isolated street crews, but extensions of larger syndicates that stretch back to El Salvador, Honduras, and Mexico. Defense News reported that forensic tracing of seized weapons revealed origins in Mexico's Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels, suggesting that Houston had become a strategic relay point for arms and drugs. These revelations forced federal agencies to widen their scope, transforming a local operation into part of a broader campaign under Joint Task Force Vulcan, the national effort to dismantle transnational gang structures. The timing was not coincidental. As the Russia-Ukraine war disrupted black market arms flows through Eastern Europe, Mexican cartels began diversifying supply chains, pushing more narcotics through Gulf Coast ports. That shift rippled into Houston, which sits at the crossroads of maritime highway and air traffic routes. Intelligence obtained by Reuters confirmed that encrypted messaging apps tied Houston operatives to shipments of fentanyl precursors arriving from Chinese suppliers. In this sense, the city became not just a battleground for local safety, but a front line in America's defense against global trafficking. Western experts stressed the strategic overlap. Dr. Mark Galeotti, a well-known scholar on organized crime, told DW, "The war in Ukraine has accelerated the globalization of organized crime. Arms that once flowed into Donbass are now redirected into Latin America. Drugs that once transited Eastern Europe now flood American cities. The Houston raids should be seen in this broader matrix." The regional expansion also highlights vulnerabilities in U.S. infrastructure. Highway corridors like I-10 and I-45 serve not only commuters, but also smugglers moving drugs and people. The raids uncovered elaborate smuggling tunnels and stash houses designed to funnel contraband with minimal detection. Similar methods have been used along the U.S.-Mexico border, but the discovery of such setups deep inside Texas shocked even seasoned agents. For NATO allies, the implications are direct. European law enforcement agencies are facing a surge of cocaine shipments arriving through West African ports before being rerouted to Spain, Portugal, and Italy. Intelligence sharing between Europol and U.S. Homeland Security has intensified since the Houston raids, with officials emphasizing that disrupting American nodes weakens the same supply chains, undermining European stability. Still, the expansion raises a troubling question. If cartels and gangs operate as international shadow states, can traditional policing alone defeat them? Critics argue that without addressing demand corruption and weak borders, such crackdowns will merely scatter criminals rather than eliminate them. Proponents counter that each raid buys communities time and prevents further entrenchment of violent networks. The Houston sweep thus marked not an end, but a pivot. It expanded the battlefield, connected dots across states and continents, and reminded policymakers that the fight against organized crime has no geographic limits. What happens when gangs adapt faster than the law? The Houston raids revealed just how dynamic the battlefield has become. Even as ICE and its partners celebrated 822 arrests, intelligence officials warned that gangs and cartels are already shifting tactics, exploiting encrypted platforms, leveraging legal loopholes, and embedding deeper into migrant flows. According to Reuters, investigators discovered that several of the suspects coordinated exclusively through encrypted messaging apps, some designed in Eastern Europe and marketed as privacy-first platforms. This digital shield has become as critical to cartels as weapons or cash, allowing leaders to orchestrate smuggling from Mexico, El Salvador, and beyond, while keeping American law enforcement one step behind. Analysts at BBC World noted that these tactics mirror those used by extremist groups in Syria and Iraq, underscoring the blurred line between criminal and insurgent strategies. Federal agencies have responded by intensifying border and technology checks. Biometric systems are now being deployed at scale across southern entry points, while cyber units have been tasked with penetrating cartel-linked communication channels. Yet the challenge remains immense. The same tools that protect privacy for ordinary citizens can shelter traffickers and predators. This is the new arms race, explained Dr. Bruce Hoffman of Georgetown University in an interview with The Guardian. Law enforcement is racing to adapt as fast as criminals innovate. It's not about firepower anymore, it's about data dominance. For policymakers in Washington, this creates a strategic dilemma. President Donald Trump has emphasized that the federal government will not tolerate American cities being used as sanctuaries for transnational crime. His administration has pushed for harsher penalties and faster deportations, echoing his broader national security agenda. At the same time, lawmakers face pressure from advocacy groups to safeguard civil liberties and avoid turning immigrant communities into perpetual suspects. The balancing act between security and trust is now at the center of the national debate. The implications extend far beyond U.S. borders. NATO intelligence officials warn that organized crime has become a form of hybrid warfare, eroding Western stability, much like cyber attacks or disinformation campaigns. Cartels funnel drugs that weaken society, smuggle weapons that fuel conflicts, and launder money through international systems that touch European banks. By crushing nodes in Houston, U.S. forces indirectly bolster allied defenses in Europe and the Middle East. Yet experts caution that no single raid can dismantle such global ecosystems. From a community perspective, the stakes remain human. Families in Houston breathe easier with predators removed from the streets. But questions linger. Will the vacuum left behind invite new gangs, or will trust in law enforcement grow stronger? Can a city scarred by fear truly heal when raids feel like military operations in civilian neighborhoods? Ultimately, the Houston crackdown offers both a warning and a lesson. America can strike hard, but sustaining security requires vigilance, international cooperation, and policies that balance toughness with fairness. The war against organized crime is no longer a local story. It is a global front woven into the same strategic tapestry as conflicts in Ukraine, Israel, and the South China Sea. And so the question remains, can the United States and its allies stay ahead of criminals who think like insurgents and operate like shadow states? Or will each victory like Houston be only the beginning of the next fight? The Houston raids, dubbed Operation Take Back America, marked one of the largest U.S. crackdowns on transnational gangs, with 822 suspects arrested. Behind the numbers lay chilling details: murderers, child predators, and cartel operatives hiding in Texas neighborhoods. Supported by FBI, DEA, ATF, and local police ICE, used AI-driven surveillance, biometric ID checks, and joint force tactics modeled on counterinsurgency operations abroad. The arrests disrupted MS-13 and Pisa's affiliates, exposed supply lines linked to Mexican cartels, and widened into a multi-state campaign under Joint Task Force Vulcan. Yet the aftermath revealed deep tensions. Courts face overloaded dockets, advocacy groups challenge civil liberties, and communities oscillate between relief and fear. Globally, the raids connect to shifting drug routes shaped by the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, with NATO viewing organized crime as part of hybrid warfare against the West. Experts warn that gangs now operate like shadow states, using encrypted platforms and global supply chains to adapt rapidly. For the Trump administration, the operation symbolizes a toughened law and order agenda. But the larger question endures: can America sustain the fight against organized crime while preserving trust at home and stability abroad?